Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge. Today we have more World in Flames for you. We're going to be picking up with the September-October 1937 turn. Last time out we saw the center of gravity in the Spanish Civil War sort of move to the eastern mountains in the Valencia region as the Republicans launched an all-out attack on a couple of nationalist corps that were trying to reach their comrades in the northeast. The attack went very poorly for the Republicans and ended up losing a division for no loss to the nationalists. On the political side, we had a couple of missteps, some miscalculations on the part of Chamberlain's government, and I think either the Japanese or the Soviets. It might have been the Soviets. So we'll see if they can get their diplomatic houses in order. We are approaching 1938, and as a bit of a heads up, 1938, there are going to be 5 major powers that will become eligible to gear up once we hit 1938. So I expect many, if not all of them, will be looking to gear up as soon as possible after the turn of the year. And with that will come a reasonably sizable increase in their production, which is going to mean more units going on map and more political adventures. So we'll see what happens here as we move forward. But I think we're starting to get to the point in the game where things are going to noticeably start to pick up, and we're going to see some more action basically all over the place. So let's go ahead and get started and see what happens. As always, we're going to start off with the political phase, and the major powers have recorded their bids for the turn, but we'll start off with a quick review of the money on hand following last turn's production. Germany, once again, sits at the top with a total of 4 Reichsmarks on hand. Then come France and the Soviet Union with 3. China has 2, and then the Commonwealth, Japan, and Italy all sit at 1, and the United States is at -1. So again, not a lot of cash on hand to do much in the way of political options, but that has not stopped most of the major powers from bidding for initiative this time. And we'll start off. Germany is going to bid 1, again sitting at the top of the initiative track here. Really doesn't want to give up that +4, and so therefore for Germany it's worth it to bid at least 1. That's gonna, it's gonna give her a 5 total, which should be pretty sufficient to secure either the top spot or one of the top spots in the initiative order this turn. Italy, with just 1 lira on hand right now, she is keeping an eye on developments in Spain. Obviously, she really would like the nationalists to come out on top in this civil war, and preferably come out on top as quickly as possible. But right now, things appear to not necessarily be going against the nationalists, and rather than bidding and spending some cash now, I think she's going to hold off, not bid. Maybe try and either save up some money to where she could perhaps in future turns begin supplying arms to the nationalists by building units for them or what have you. So for now, Italy's going to sit this political phase out and bid 0. Japan is finally back in the black and out of debt at 1, but that's not going to last for long. Japan is bidding 1 herself, so we'll see what they have in mind. The Soviet Union, interestingly enough, sitting at 3 rubles on hand, is actually bidding 4. One of the largest bids I think we've seen thus far. So there's obviously something that the Soviets want to do, and they're willing to spend heavily to get it done. Now, with their +1, that will give them a 5, which will match the Germans. So we'll see how the order comes out here in just a moment. As far as the democracies go, the Commonwealth, having hopefully learned from their mistake last time, are bidding 2 in an effort to get a lower position than the French, which will allow the 2 of them to hopefully pull off the treaty that should have been signed last time if the Commonwealth had actually bid a little bit higher and made sure that they were in a lower position than the French. So that just leaves China and the U.S., neither of which really have any pressing matters, the U.S. sitting at -1 after having laid down 2 very large aircraft carriers in Lexington and Saratoga the last 2 turns. They're going to hold off and not bother bidding. So what that means is we have actually 5 of the 8 major powers bidding for initiative this turn. The 2 top, actually we have 3 major powers all tied with a grand total of 5. Germany bid 1 plus 4 is 5. The Commonwealth bid 2, they get a +3, which is also 5. And then the Soviet Union bid 4, giving them a +1, which is a third 5. That means we're going to have to turn to the political effectiveness for the tiebreaker. And as you can see, Germany, with the highest political effectiveness, is going to secure that first spot again, very cheaply, I might add, particularly when you consider that the Soviets bid 4 to her 1. Now, the Soviets are, by virtue of their high political effectiveness, going to be able to come in at the 2nd position here, which means the Commonwealth will end up 3rd. After those 3, France bid 1 with a +3, gives her a total of 4. That's good for 4th position. And then finally the Japanese, who bid 1, get a +2, 3. They'll come in just behind the French in 5th. And then of the 3 non-bidding powers, Italy's got a 0 +2 for the bid modifier, will put her in 6th. The United States will get that 0 +1, and China will have 0 total. So they will slide into 7th and 8th again. And we have our initiative order set for this political phase, and the last card marker is going to come all the way down here to the Japanese. Now, it'll be interesting to see how many of these major powers actually get to play a political option, because so far in this game we have seen the political phase end early quite often. So hopefully we'll get some cooperative dice and we'll get a chance to run through a rather active political phase. And with that, let's go ahead and get started and see what Germany decides to do when she's up first. Well, the first blitzkrieg Germany is conducting in this game is apparently a diplomatic blitzkrieg. They have been on an alliance signing run here the last several months this year. They've signed an alliance with Hungary. Last turn they signed one with Sweden. This turn they're going to try to target Finland, keeping in with their Scandinavian strategy and attempting to sign an alliance with Finland. Now you can see the cost here is 5 money if it's successful. So we're going to have to wait for the die roll to see whether or not we're going to pay. And then we will apply the treaty chart for both the minor effects and the U.S. entry. What we're looking at here is we're going to need to roll a 1 die. It's going to have to be greater than a 0, but there are some modifiers. We're going to add 1 to result for each factory or resource marker we have in the country. There are none currently in Finland. We're going to add the miner's willpower. Finland's willpower is a 5, so that +5 is very helpful. Then we're going to subtract Germany's initiative position, which is 1st, so that brings it down to a +4. Now we need to subtract the distance in hexes between Finland's marker and Germany's marker. Finland is dead smack in the center of the neutral zone, which is 5 hexes away from Germany. That 5 from the 4 gives us a -1, and you can see the miner is not hostile and we're not trying to break an alliance. So it's a net -1 DRM to this die roll. Germany, in order to make this happen, is going to need to roll anything but a 1. And they rolled a 10, which means the alliance is going to go through. We'll pay 5 for Germany. That's going to bring her 5. That's going to bring her to -2 right now, heading into production later, because it was 5 for the option itself, plus the 1 for the bid from her starting bank of 4. So what I'll do now is go ahead and record all this. I'll place the influence markers, the control markers in the various countries, and then we will see which country Germany is going to activate to wrap up this political option. Well, the signing of the alliance with Finland did not have a big impact on the international scene. U.S. entry was only a +4. That's going to bring Germany up to, I believe it's +21 now, although that's technically not the actual U.S. entry as far as actionable U.S. entry, I'll say, in the game. Like the standalone WIF U.S. entry system, the actual U.S. entry is kind of a formula. In WIF, you'll use the chits. You're going to multiply the chits in the one pool, add adding half of the chits from the other pool to give you that total. Similar sort of concept here. There's a formula based on the entry against the specific target country, and then you're going to add or subtract portions of other nations to get your true U.S. entry. And I'll go over that in more detail and show you that as it gets more relevant. But for now, the U.S. entry, I think, can be considered very low across the board, although of all the nations, Germany does have the highest U.S. entry currently. As far as the effects on minor countries, not that many care either way, and they're all located, unsurprisingly, in Northern and Eastern Europe. Austria liked it. Germany picked up a +1 influence there. The Baltic states, Germany picked up +2 influence, but she had -1, so that basically just flipped her over to the positive side there with a +1. Denmark liked it. Germany got a +1 there, but again, she was sitting at a -2, so what this did is just raise her to -1 influence. Finland, not surprisingly, picked up a +3, but when that was added to the 1 that Germany had there previously, that gives her a net total of +4 right now. And then finally, Sweden liked it. They picked up +1 influence there in Sweden for Germany. And looking across the map as to which country, which minor to activate, I think it's probably pretty obvious what Germany wants to do, and she's going to take advantage of the 4 influence she currently has in Finland, along with the -2 that the Soviets currently have. So we're going to activate Finland, and we're going to head over to the status display. Here we are on the status display. You can see Finland located here at the very center of the neutral zone. We have 4 German and -2 Soviet influence. So the Germans will go ahead and they'll resolve their 4 influence first. And that's going to be enough to move Finland to 4. So 2 hexes in their direction. And then we'll resolve the Soviet -2. That's going to be enough to push Finland 1 hex away from the Soviets there. So Germany, with the signing of that alliance, did manage to move Finland a ways out of the center of the neutral zone. Not quite enough to get them into the fascist ideology yet, but Germany will keep an eye on that. I'm sure they will be looking to pursue policies here going forward over the next couple of years to try to finally reel Finland into the club, as it were. So the last thing we need to do with Germany is to roll to see if she ends the political phase, and since nothing else has been played prior to this, it will only end on a 1, and that is a 7, which means we are moving on to the Soviet Union now. We'll see what they were so anxious to bid for to grab an early position in the initiative order. Now, what has got Stalin so worked up that he bids a huge, relatively huge amount of 4 for a political option bid? Well, the answer is in the Far East. Now, ever since the purges essentially stripped the Soviet Far Eastern defenses bare, they've been keeping a relatively close eye on the Japanese and what they've been doing. You noticed a number of the reinforcements the Soviets have been building over the last year and a half have primarily gone to the Far East. The Soviets have really not liked what they've seen from Japan. Obviously, the gear up at the beginning of this year sort of unsettled them a bit. But what really sort of got them on edge was when the Japanese built that Marine Corps a few turns back. Now, if you've been watching, you've noticed that the vast majority of the military builds so far in this game have been naval. And again, that's because the naval units have the longest build time, up to 12 turns in the cases of the carriers and battleships. Whereas the land units really only take 2 to 3 turns for the most part. I think your armored corps are 4 turns, and you might have, I think the airborne troops might be 5. But for the most part, 2 or 3 turns. So you're really not going to turn to building land forces until you are intending to need them in the near future. So the Soviets are a little worried that Japan is getting ready to do something very aggressive. They're not so much worried about themselves necessarily, just based on the current Japanese deployment. But again, Manchukuo is not that big, and it wouldn't take that long for the Japanese to shift their forces over to face the Soviets. What the Soviets are primarily concerned, though, for at this point is China. Now, in China, we've got the nationalists headed by Chiang and the communists headed by Mao. Now, the communist power base here is in Lanzhou, and they control that city and the hexes around that. The rest of the country is pretty much controlled by the nationalists. However, you can see Chongqing here has 2 factories and 2 resources, and Chengdu has a factory and a resource as well. So that's a considerable portion of the nationalist military economy is very close to the communist stronghold. And for that reason, we've had Chiang deploying a big chunk of the nationalist forces opposite Mao's communists there to keep an eye on them. And of course, Mao is also looking to protect his position here in Lanzhou from the nationalists. In days of decision, it is very possible for a civil war to break out in China between the communists and the nationalists. Now, the Soviets, even though they do back Mao and the Chi-Coms, they are not interested in seeing a civil war break out at this point in time, particularly because it would probably be a fairly one-sided affair, since the nationalists have more forces on map than the communists do right now. But it's not so much Chiang that Stalin's worried about, it's the Japanese, because the nationalist deployment is so heavy here at the interior of the country. They don't have very much out here on the coast or in northern China against a potential Japanese invasion. And Chiang is not going to simply walk away and turn his back on Mao at this point. So Stalin has decided to play an option which will take the Chinese Civil War off the table for a considerable amount of time. And the option he's going to go with this turn is Russian option 8, abduct Chiang Kai-shek. So, yes, you heard me right, that's abduct Chiang Kai-shek. What's that all about? Let's go and take a closer look at this particular option. Here is Russian option 8, abduct Chiang Kai-shek. Now, this option actually is based on a historical event, and there's an excellent book by Rana Mitter called Forgotten Ally, which covers basically the Chinese side of the Second World War, and it does discuss this particular incident in some detail. So if you're curious about this, or really learning a little bit more about the Chinese war overall, I would highly recommend the book. I think it is still in print and should be fairly easy to find. Anyway, back to the game here. So the Soviets are going to be doing Russian option 8. The prerequisite for this is the Soviet Union can only play this option if she has not played Russia 7 and her initiative is less than half of China's. So that first part, Russia 7, that Russia 7 option is Chinese Civil War. That's what I just mentioned a moment ago. The Soviets could potentially, if they meet the prerequisites here, the Soviets could opt to start the Civil War in China. This is a good example of one of the many branching ways a Days of Decision whiff game can go. And it's one of the reasons why I do enjoy tacking Days of Decision onto your standard whiff game. In this particular situation, though, the only people that a Chinese Civil War would benefit now or in the near future are the Japanese. So Stalin has decided to go the other way and take the Civil War off the table, eliminate the possibility of that for the foreseeable future. Now, the second half of this is the Soviets' initiative is less than half of China's. And this is where the Soviets ran into problems earlier in the year. Back when they ended up playing the option to gain all of that influence in Iran, that was when they wanted to do this option. However, they didn't meet the prerequisite of being less than half of China's initiative at that point, so they were unable to play this back then and sort of defaulted to the influence option. Now, China is in the 8th initiative position. Half of that is 4, but you can see here it has to be less than half. So the Soviets needed to be in the top 3 as far as political initiative this turn. And because of that, they had to weigh in pretty heavily with their bid. That's why it was such a big bid at 4. Now, they could have assured themselves of being in a top position if they had bid even higher than that. But remember, every major power is kind of trying to thread that needle of bidding enough to get them where they need to be, but not overpaying for it, because you can't afford to waste build points and money in this game. And that's one of the challenging things about Days of Decision. Again, it's another element to the game that I enjoy, and it's another reason to sort of add this to your normal World in Flames experience. And in this case, the Soviets 4 got them tied with the Germans and the British, and unfortunately, because their political effectiveness was so high, they slotted in at the number 2 spot. So they are going to meet both of the prerequisites this turn, which will allow them to play the option. We can see that the cost for this is only 2, so it's not terribly expensive, aside from the massive bid she put in on it, but that is going to take her down to a total of -3 right now. So the Soviets are getting a little into debt. They've got production coming up at the end of the turn, which is going to help, but that's only going to be 3 build points, so it's probably going to bring them back up to 0. So they'll get out of the red, but only if they choose not to build anything. We can see the effects here on the minor countries. Not a huge effect for most countries. U.S. entry. U.S. has a little more interest in this with +10. So that of course, Chang is I guess, putative ally of the United States, or at least the United States considers him to be a friend over there. So when you abduct one of their friends, that's going to get the U.S.'s attention a little bit. But it's not severe enough that the Soviets have really anything to fear from U.S. entry. But it is a fairly sizable jump, as you can see here. Now, what are the effects of this? Well, after playing this option, China and the Soviet Union may not start a Chinese civil war, which could be started either by Chinese option 7 or Russian option 7 for 60 turns. That's the equivalent of 10 years. So we're looking at September, October 1947 before a civil war can break out. Now, if China is already in a civil war, then the nationalist and communist forces cannot attack each other if China is at war with another major power. So what that will do is it would just, if supposing the Japanese declared war on China during the Chinese Civil War, that would sort of call a truce, if you will, or a ceasefire between the two sides. But as soon as the war with Japan ends, then they're right back at one another. It can get messy. So the communists, looking maybe at the long game here in Asia, have decided it's best for the time being to have Mao and Chiang cooperate against what they see as the bigger threat, Japan. And that's basically all that this option is going to do. It is a limited option, which means it can only be played once. So now that it's been played, it is no longer available for the Soviets to select again in the future. And they won't need to, really, with the Civil War now unable to start until 1947 at the earliest. We can kind of safely set that aside and not have to worry about that, certainly until the fascists both in Europe and Asia have been defeated. Now, what this will hopefully do, since both sides now know that they no longer have to worry about the other Chinese faction, they can start to worry more about the Japanese and get deployed in a little bit stronger defense for a potential Japanese invasion. The only question at this point is it in time? Did they settle this soon enough? Because the Soviets, quite frankly, expected the Japanese to have declared war on China already this year, and are kind of wondering why they haven't. So, having paid for the option, we've basically implemented the option. I will go ahead and I'm going to mark out the minor country modifiers here, record the U.S. entry, and then the Soviets will be able to activate a minor country, and we'll see which one they choose over on the map. Well, the minor country effects were kind of all over the place here. Chile, Mexico, Portugal, Saudi Arabia, Siam, and Turkey all didn't really care for it, and the Soviets picked up -1 influence in each of those countries. Surprisingly, though, a little bit, the Netherlands and Spain actually kind of liked it, and the Soviets picked up 1 influence in both of those countries. Now, with that, the Soviets have a lot of 1 influence, either positive or negative, scattered all over the globe, but they don't really have a lot of influence in any one country. So if they activate something here, it's not going to be one that's going to move any of the miners necessarily directly towards them or in their direction. But that doesn't mean that activating a miner could be entirely useless. Well, what they're going to do is they're going to go after Yugoslavia here. They're going to activate Yugoslavia. Now, they do have a -1 influence in there, but we know that that's going to be basically wasted and blown off. But both Italy and Germany are looking at -2. So this should move Yugoslavia at least away from the fascist European powers, which could indirectly benefit the communists. So let's go ahead and activate Yugoslavia and head over to the status display. By the way, here is the book that I mentioned earlier, Forgotten Ally by Rana Mitter, China's World War II, 1937 to 1945. This really is an excellent, kind of a high-level overview of China in that time period. I've got a paperback edition here. The list price is $17.99 US, but I'm sure you can find it for even less than that online somewhere. And I do recommend it. It's a great read for anyone interested in learning more about that theater in that time period. Now, back to the game here, you can see we have the Yugoslav marker located here. We have 3 control markers to resolve. It's not really going to matter, I think, the order in which these are done. So we'll resolve the Soviet one first. That -1 is not going to be enough to move the marker at all. Next up, we'll resolve the Italian -2. That will be enough to move it 1 hex away from the Italians located down here in the fascist ideology. And then we have a -2 for the Germans to resolve, which is going to move it 1 hex away from the Germans. While it doesn't necessarily directly help the Soviets that much, you can see the marker has moved a little bit closer here to the French, and the French are very interested in building and maintaining that little entente in Central and Eastern Europe to help counterbalance Germany. So this move on the Soviets' part may have been of an indirect benefit to the French. So we'll see what happens down the road if France now decides to try to reach out to Yugoslavia and bring her under her, I guess, into her orbit fully. So the only thing remaining to be done is to roll to see if the turn is going to end. And for that, we do have a -1 modifier to the die roll because the Germans have done 1 political option previous to this. The 8 -1 is a 7, so the political phase does continue, and that means next up, we'll slide the last card marker down here. It's going to be the Commonwealth, and we'll see if the Commonwealth can manage to get that treaty signed with France. As I mentioned last turn and probably earlier this turn, the Commonwealth is going to be playing Commonwealth Option 3, Treaty. They're offering a level 2 treaty to France. Now, the cost for this, as you can see, is 4 money, but only if it's successful. So I'm not going to pay for it yet. The minor country modifiers as well as U.S. entry are all dependent upon the treaty signing being successful. So there's nothing really to do now other than wait to see if France is able to play their option 0F and accept the treaty. And then at that point, I'll go ahead and make the payments, and we'll make the adjustments here. That's also when we'll activate the miners. So not much to do here other than for the Commonwealth to roll the die and see if they end the political phase prematurely, which would not make either themselves or France very happy. There have been 2 political options played so far, which means we're looking at a -2 modifier here. So we're going to need a 4 or better to keep this thing going. And I don't know if we can see that. That is a 10, which is more than enough. So we're going to slide the last card marker down to France, and now France is up, and we know that France has a standing level 2 treaty on offer. All they have to do now is play their 0F, agree to a proposal, which is what we're going to do right here. You can see it costs 0 money. There's no modifier effects, there's no US entry effects, so we're going to basically fall back on these effects here. I'll go ahead and pay the 4 money out of the Commonwealth's funds and then implement the minor country effects. And then we will head over to the maps and select a minor country to activate. Well, not surprisingly, a treaty signing between the Commonwealth and France had some far-ranging effects on minor countries, well over a dozen countries. I think there were probably about 15 or 16 countries had some sort of reaction to the treaty signing. Countries ranging anywhere from Mexico to Saudi Arabia, even Siam, I think, didn't particularly like it. The countries that had the biggest reaction, the biggest positive reaction, were Poland and Yugoslavia, where the Commonwealth picked up 2 positive influence each. Czechoslovakia, though, really loved it. The Commonwealth gained 3 positive influence there. Combined with the 2 that they already had, that gives them 5 positive influence currently in Czechoslovakia. And Germany is sitting at a -3 in Czechoslovakia right now, along with Italy and the USSR each having -1. So Commonwealth thinking about which country to activate. The obvious choices, I think, right now are either Yugoslavia with the +2 or Poland, and that would shift them certainly 1 hex in the right direction, and it would really bring Yugoslavia nice and close to France. Or we can take advantage of this +5 here in Czechoslovakia and get some real movement out of the Czechs. I think what we'll do is I think we'll forego Yugoslavia for now, and I think we will go ahead and activate Czechoslovakia here, and we'll see what this result, what results will show up on the status display over there. So we'll head over there and resolve these 4 control markers. Here we are on the status display, and you can see the Czechoslovakia markers here, already inside the Democrat ideology in the Social Democrat faction, and in fact adjacent to the French control marker. So I think in an ideal world for the Democrats, the Czech marker ends up stacked with France, because France already has an alliance with Czechoslovakia. So that would allow France to align the Czechs should a war break out at some point in the future. But I don't think we're going to be able to make that happen given this set of influence. And I do think the way we resolve, the order in which we resolve these markers is going to have an impact on where the Czechs end up. So first thing, we know that this -1 from Italy is not going to be enough to move the marker at all. So we'll resolve this first and have that take no effect. Likewise, the -1 for the Soviets, that's going to be the same thing. It's not going to be moving the marker at all, and we'll resolve that, which brings us down to the -3 German or the +5 Commonwealth. And I think what we're going to do here is I think we're going to go ahead and resolve the 5 Commonwealth influence first. Now, it costs 2 to move a hex. If the minor country is moving towards you within your ideology, you subtract 1, so that's going to lower the cost to 1. And if we move into this hex here, we're crossing a boundary, which is going to add a +1 to the cost. And then we get another +1 for moving away from any allied major power. Since we are moving away from France, that's going to actually cost us 3 to get across the boundary into the free market faction. And then we're going to have another 2 to move here. So it's a base cost of 2, -1 for moving closer to us in the same ideology, but then +1 for moving away from an allied major power. That's going to burn all 5 of the Commonwealth influence. Now, they did manage to get the Czechs almost into their hex, but not quite. Now we have the -3 from Germany to resolve. And in this case, the Czechs, they can either they will have enough, since they're moving away. It's a base cost 2. They could go into the capitalist faction, actually, because it's +1 to cross the boundary there. And I don't think, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. They would not be moving any further away from the French, so they would not incur an additional +1 to do that. So that's a possibility, or we could move it away from Germany into this hex, which would cost 2 of the 3. And I think the French are more interested in getting control of the Czechs than the Commonwealth. So we're going to have the Czech marker move here, and then that third influence, negative influence from the Germans, is just going to be kind of wasted. So you can see there's a bit of a tug of war going on here between the Commonwealth and France over Czechoslovakia, although I don't think the Commonwealth, while the Commonwealth was maybe hoping to get them stacked with their markers so that they could align them in the future, they don't have an alliance currently with the Czechs, which means they would have to play an option at some point down the road of signing a minor country alliance with them in order to make that happen. So the French are not exactly happy to see the marker move a hex further from them and end up in a different faction, but it's not. They're still well within reach of the French being able to influence them into their hex. So after all of the influence has been resolved, I guess we are looking at really just seeing if the turn, or if the political phase ends. And we have had 3 political options played prior to this, which means we're looking at a -3 to the die roll. So we're going to need a 5 or better here to keep the political phase going for the Japanese. And we do just get that 5. -3 is a 2, so the political phase continues. And in what is a bit of a rarity, we actually are going to have or get to see 5 political options played out in the same political phase. One thing I did want to go over briefly is just what does it mean now that there's a level 2 treaty between the Commonwealth and France? Well, you get all of the same effects as the level 1 treaty that we went over. In addition, you can immediately renegotiate any trade agreement. So currently the UK is sending 2 oil to France, and I think they're content to leave that like it is. Interestingly, you may now pay part or all of the cost of your treaty partner's options. So now if France, who has a lower income than the Commonwealth and will likely continue to have a lower income than the Commonwealth, now can come to the Commonwealth and ask them to maybe help offset the cost of any political options that they're looking to do down the road. Commonwealth or France will also have a casus bellum against every major power that their treaty partner is at war with, provided that the treaty partner has been at war with that country for at least 6 turns, and it has been at least 6 turns since we signed this level 2 treaty. So in another year, a casus bellum will occur once one of these 2 major powers is at war with somebody and has been at war with them for a year. Beyond that, you may, if you're neutral but your partner isn't, you can lend lease up to 5 build points and or resources per turn. And you can also supply lend lease aircraft to your partner. You can base, let's see, you can now enter your treaty partner's home country up to the foreign troop commitment limit. So that was kind of the big one for France and Commonwealth, because this is going to allow Commonwealth ground and air units to fight alongside the French if necessary within France itself. Prior to this, with the level 1, they could fight in French colonies or aligned minor countries, but they couldn't enter the home country hexes of France itself. So the Democrats, or at least the Commonwealth and France, are, I guess, kind of satisfied, at least for now, with their level 2 treaty signing. And we have just one more option to resolve. That's Japan. Let's see what they decide to do. The Japanese are going to take advantage of their current situation to play Japan option 8. Tojo takes over. Now, this is something you can see. Japan, the prerequisites, Japan may only play this option if either Japan has previously played Japan 7, which is Manchuria abandoned. And I can guarantee you that the only way Japan 7 will have been played is at gunpoint with the Japanese. That basically, Japan surrenders Manchuria, becomes now controlled by China. Even if they do reconquer it, they won't be able to use the blue factory in Manchuria like they can do now. So Japan 7, option 7 really isn't an option as far as the Japanese are concerned. So that is not going to happen, which means we got to rely on prerequisite B here, which is Japan's initiative is greater than any two of the Commonwealth, the Soviet Union, China, and the USA. Well, Japan is currently sitting in the 5th position. China is 8, United States is 7, so they're not greater than either of those two. However, the Soviet Union is sitting in the 2nd position and the Commonwealth is sitting in the 3rd position. So her initiative is greater than Commonwealth and Soviet Union, which will allow her to play this. That's not very common of an occurrence. And so while Japan may have been considering another option this turn, they're going to take advantage of the unique circumstances to play option 8, Tojo takes over, and get this out of the way. Now you can see this only costs 1 money, which is nice because they were sitting at 0 after their bid. That's going to drop them to -1. And we have some minor country effects here, not very many, as you can see. The U.S. entry, however, the U.S. is not a big fan of this. That's a +11. So what does Japan get for Tojo taking over? Well, they increase their political effectiveness by 2. That's going to jump them up from 2, where it is now, to 4, which will put them on par with the Soviet political effectiveness. And Japan must move her political marker towards the center of fascism. Japan gets 8 movement points, minus her initiative position, which in this case is 5. So we're going to get 3 total movement points. She may move minors she's stacked with or become stacked with while moving. You must stop as soon as you reach one of the center hexes not already occupied by another major power. This is a limited option, which means they can only select it 1 time, so this will be done for the game. But with Tojo taking over, Japan is kind of embarking on a more aggressive, at least as far as foreign policy goes, a more adventurous path here. And this may clear the way for some other options down the road. But in any event, it is going to increase Japan's political effectiveness, which is hard to increase in this game. There is an option 0 selection that allows you to attempt to increase your political effectiveness, but in order to do that, you have to spend 3 money for each die roll. You're going to roll 1d10. If you roll a 10 on a die, your political effectiveness will increase by 1. You can roll as many dice as you pay for, but at 3 build points per roll of the die, excuse me, and just a 1 in 10 chance, it's not easy to raise your political effectiveness. There are a couple of other ways to raise your political effectiveness. As you've seen, the purges in the Soviet Union allowed the Soviets to increase their political effectiveness. When a major power declares war on you, your political effectiveness will increase as well. So now, having paid for it, I will go ahead and record the relatively minor country effects, no pun intended, and then we'll we'll activate a minor country. When we head over to the display, that's when I'll go ahead and move her marker, Japan's marker, towards the center of the fascist ideology, and then implement the minor country effects on the activated minor. Well, there are only 6 minor countries that had any kind of reaction to Tojo taking over. Most of them were, well, about half of them were in Central and South America. Chile, Mexico, each picked up +1 Japanese influence, while Venezuela added a -1 to the -3 she already had. So Japan's sitting at -4 influence in Venezuela. She does have +2 influence in Mexico, curiously, and the United States currently has -2. So that may be a potential target for activation this turn. Besides those countries, the Netherlands didn't really like it. They got -2 influence. Portugal added a -1, giving Japan a -3 there. And then Siam actually did like it with a +2. Japan already had 3 influence in Siam. That gives her +5 right now. So I think she is going to go ahead and activate Siam rather than Mexico, simply because Siam is a little bit more strategically important to Japan than Mexico is. Mexico would be one of those kind of nice to have minor countries, particularly being located where it is. It could be a real pain, or at least a distraction for the United States. Could provide some excellently placed naval bases for Japan in the event of war between the two. But that is a long way off in the future, and for the moment, Japan is more interested in increasing her influence and control in Southeast Asia for the moment. So we're going to go ahead and activate Siam. We're going to pull all 3 control markers out of here. We're going to head to the status display, where we will move the Japanese marker first, and then we'll resolve these 3 control markers. First order of business here on the status display is to move the Japan marker per the option. Now, Japan got 8 movement points minus her initiative position, which in this case is the 5th position. So that's going to give her a total of 3 movement points. Works just like moving any of the minor country markers. She does have to move towards the center of the fascist ideology, and she will move from this hex into here. It's going to be 2 + 1 crossing that boundary. That's going to consume all 3 movement points that she has. So while she didn't move very far, she didn't quite make it all the way into the middle. She did move from the paternal monarchist into the authoritarian faction. Now, with that out of the way, we can resolve the 3 control markers that were in Siam. You can see Siam located here in the center of the neutral zone. First thing we'll do is we'll just get rid of this Soviet -1 marker. That's not going to be enough to budge the marker, so no effect there. Now we want to think maybe for a second on which one of these 2 we want to resolve first, because the negative influence on the UK, which is located here, is going to move the marker in this direction. Now, Japan's located over there, so that's not a huge help to her. It may be best, perhaps, to move the Siamese marker in this way and then down versus down and then over. In the end, it may not really matter all that much. I don't think Japan is going to be able to get Siam quite into the fascist ideology. Let's see, if we did it, it would be, if we did the Commonwealth first, they would move here to the hex where the Baltic states is, and then from there we'd get 2, 4, so they would end up, Siam would end up right here. If we did the Japanese marker first, it'd probably go 2, 4 to here, and then it's going to move there. So really it doesn't matter. It's going to end up in the same location in this circumstance. So we'll resolve the 2 and then the 5, so it'll move here, and then we'll go 2, 4 to here. And Siam is just outside of the fascist ideology, and it is a little bit closer to Japan, and it's food for thought as far as the Japanese go as to how much more maybe diplomacy they want to invest in wooing Siam. With that, we have completed all of the major powers that have bid for an option. So that's going to bring the political phase to a close here. And now it's time to go onto the maps with the WiFCE portion of the turn. I'll roll weather and initiative, and then we'll take a look at the reinforcements that are coming in and get right into the meat of the turn. Now, before we move into the WiFCE portion of the turn, I thought I'd just take a minute here to discuss U.S. entry in a little bit more detail. You heard me talk about the U.S. entry level being rising to +21 against Germany because of her actions earlier this turn, but that wasn't really the actionable U.S. entry against Germany. With the days of decision U.S. entry method, each of the political options, as we've seen, has a U.S. entry impact. Either most of them are positive, there are a few negatives in there. And so we're going to keep track of that level against each individual major power, including the United States, in the game. And you can see here at the top of this play aid that, at least I think it's on here. Here it is. U.S. may only declare war on another major power if its modified U.S. entry effect against that major power is 80 or higher. So no U.S. DOWs unless its modified entry is 80 or higher. If the U.S. does not have, well, this is 65 naval points when playing DoD as a standalone, or the requirements in WIF that are defined in U.S. entry option 26. That's the moving the fleet to Pearl Harbor. If the U.S. does not have the fleet stationed in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, then it needs a modified total of 100 or higher in order to declare war on China, the Commonwealth, the Soviet Union, or Japan. Now, you can see on this particular play aid, we've got a series of columns here, one for each of the major powers, and we've got a Vichy France and Free France over here. I've been keeping track of the current U.S. entry level against the specific major powers, but you can see we've got a couple of different formulas here to determine the modified U.S. entry level. This is the entry level that is going to allow the U.S. to actually do something like declare war against a particular major power. Now, in the case of the fascist countries, the fascist major powers, you take the target major power's U.S. entry level, you're going to add half of all of the other fascist major powers. From that, you subtract the U.S.'s entry level, which is why it may seem odd at first when you hear, well, there's a U.S. entry level against the United States. Yes, this is why, because as the U.S. entry level against the U.S. or for the United States increases, that's kind of representing the U.S. getting a little more active in the international scene and conducting actions that are basically lowering the willingness to get involved more heavily against the other powers. I know I'm not describing this correctly. I'm trying to think of the equivalent in a WIF standalone game. It would be similar to the U.S. taking an option in the U.S. entry phase that has a negative U.S. entry, so say like a -5. You roll the die. If you roll a 5 or less, you remove a chit from either the Germany-Italy pool or the Japan pool. That's kind of what this entry level against or for the U.S. is kind of representing in this DoD system, if that makes sense, because you're subtracting this from the total against whatever fascist country you're looking at, it's effectively removing chits, if you will, if you want to use the analogy of the World in Flames U.S. entry system. So after adding the target fascist country's entry level and half of all the other fascists, you subtract the U.S. entry level, and then you also subtract half of all the other major powers. So what I've done here is I've put the modified entry level against each of the major powers above the chart here. Germany, for instance, has a U.S. entry level of 21 right now. So we would take 21. To that, we're going to add half of the +8 and +16 of the other two fascist powers. That's 24 divided by 2 is 12. So we have 21 plus 12 is 33. From that, we're going to subtract the 7, that is the U.S. current entry level. So that brings us from 33 down to 26. And then we're going to subtract half of all the other major powers, which you can see right now. We just have entry levels against the Commonwealth and Russia. That's 21 halved is 10.5. So from the 27, 33, 26, sorry, can't do math. 26 minus the 10.5 for the other powers gives us 15.5. That is the modified entry level against Germany. We do the same thing with Italy and it comes out at 9, and Japan is 13. For the Commonwealth, France, and China, those are all Democrats. We take the target major power level, 15 in this case. We're going to subtract the U.S. from that, plus half of all the other Democrats, which is 0. So that brings us down to 8. And then we're going to subtract half of all the other major powers, which was 21, 29, 45, 51. That's 25.5. So that's going to give us a minus 17.5 modified U.S. entry level against the Commonwealth. For France and China, it works out to be minus 25 each. And then for the communist there's only one major communist major power. You take the target major power, Russia, that's 6. We're going to add half of all the other communists, which is 0. And then we're going to subtract the U.S. entry, which is 7, giving a -1 modified entry level against the United States. So you can see currently the highest modified U.S. entry level is against Germany with 15.5, and then Japan at 13. But what do those mean? That's a long way from 80, certainly, but just as in the World in Flames entry system, in the days of decision, there are political options that the United States can play that have the same effects as a lot of the U.S. entry options that they can choose in that system. And we look here, you can see, for instance, U.S. option 9, East Coast Escort. What this does is the U.S. entry options in WIF 11, 16, and 20, which is East Coast escorts, gift of destroyers, and land-based air escorts, are all considered to have been played through the U.S. selecting this political option. Now, the prerequisite for this is that Germany's plus the Italians' U.S. entry is greater than 55, or just Germany's alone is greater than 45. The Commonwealth has to be at war with Germany, and the USA has a treaty with the Commonwealth. So there's a lot of prerequisites in there. But what we're looking at right now are just these numbers to give you an idea of how close the United States is, for instance, to being able to select this option. Well, 55 or better combined, we are currently sitting at 24.5. So we are just barely halfway there as far as that's concerned. And Germany alone, a greater than 45, you can see they're barely a third of the way. Of all of those types of options, the closest one that the U.S. is to being able to select at this point is moving the fleet to Pearl. That's U.S. option 12, which you can see right here. And that requires Japan's U.S. entry to be greater than 35 and for Japan to be at war with a democratic major power. Her current modified U.S. entry is 13. So again, just barely over a third of the way there. So it's going to be a while yet before the United States even gets to the point where she's starting to do some of those pre-war options that are going to have an impact on the other major powers before even getting to the level where she might be able to declare war. Again, I wanted to take a few minutes and get into a little more detail on that in case you were wondering, how exactly that worked and what was I talking about Germany's entry level being 21 but not really being 21. You can see the modified levels up here. Now that that's out of the way and you've got a little better idea of how the pre-war U.S. or how the U.S. is going to come into the war, that whole days of decision entry system. Now we can move on with the WIF portion of this turn with weather and initiative and then reinforcements. Well, we had a little bit of excitement in the initiative rolls. Initially, the fascists rolled a 2, had a +2 modifier, gave them a 4. The Democrats rolled an 8, and the communists rolled a 9 +2 for 11. Now, if you recall from last turn, the nationalists were trying to get their cavalry unit sort of out of its dangerous situation it's in now, and they were banking on winning initiative this turn and being able to move that cavalry corps before the Republicans could launch an attack on it. So with the initiative dice coming out like they did in that roll, the Democrats were going to be able to move ahead of the fascists. So the fascists decided to ask for a reroll. Works the same way as it does in World in Flames in this case. So we moved the fascist marker 1 box to the left and we re-rolled. And the fascists rolled a little better. They rolled a 5, gave them their +2 to 7. But it really didn't matter because the Democrats were able to uncork another 8. So they still beat them even on the re-roll. And the communists ended up rolling a, I think it was a 10, +2, 12. So the communists won the initiative. Democrats came in second, and they decided that they were going to remain where they were ahead of the fascists in third place. The communists, they don't have anything they want to do right now, so they don't particularly want to be exposed to losing their +2 that they currently have. So the communists decided they're going to go dead last. So our initiative order for this turn is going to be Democrats, fascists, and then communists. When we rolled the weather for September, October, we rolled a 6. It's generally pretty good weather. It's going to be fine everywhere except the Arctic where it's rain and North Monsoon where it is rain. But the impulse marker is going to go up 2 boxes on the track after each impulse. So this may be a little bit shorter turn because of that. That brings us to reinforcements. You can see right here, September, October. Let's see what everybody's getting. We'll start with the Spanish here. The Nationalists are adding the Spanish Blue Division, and they're adding a pretty decent garrison corps, especially for this point in time. The Republicans are adding a garrison corps as well, but not quite as good as you can see. So the Nationalists gaining a little bit of ground on the Republicans, at least for the moment. As far as everybody else, the United States is getting another carrier plane, which they will be placing in the reserve pool for the moment. And the Commonwealth is also getting another carrier plane, which will go in the reserve pool. They'll get 1 convoy point and 1 tanker point, while the French are getting 2 tanker points. Commonwealth also gets Ark Royal on the map, so they'll have to take a look and see if they are going to want to get some carrier planes on that. The Japanese, they will get Soryu on map. They have a ton of carrier planes in the reserve pool currently, and they do have 1 pilot available. So chances are pretty good that that Soryu will get a carrier plane this turn. And then the Germans are getting the Seydlitz into the construction pool. And that's going to do it for reinforcements here in September, October 1937. I'll go ahead and get these set up on map, and then we can dive right in with the Democrats' first impulse. And I think you're all probably anticipating that you're going back to Spain, and that is indeed the case. So I will see you in Spain momentarily. We pick up the action this turn in Spain. Again, elsewhere on the maps, there's really not going to be anything going on, I think, probably for any of the ideologies. The communists, I know, certainly don't really have anything to do. The fascists, obviously, the Spanish nationalists will be consuming the lion's share of activity there. The Italians still have another unit or 2 they're going to bring back from East Africa. So we'll have a naval move by the Italians at some point in the turn, but everything else pretty much is going to be happening right here in Spain. Now the Republicans are going to forego any naval moves, so we're skipping ahead. They have no air force for any ground strikes. No rail movement. Brings us to the land movement step, and they already have 4 units in position to make the attack here on the cavalry. Their reinforcement, the garrison unit they put into Madrid here, which will free up the militia unit, the Madrid militia unit that's been holding down the capital, to move out and help out. The problem is these are mountain hexes here and here, so it would take 3 movement to actually get into either of those hexes to be able to reach the attack, which means that the militia unit's not going to be available this impulse for the attack. Now, currently, without the militia unit, they've got 7 here in Valencia, 5 here is 12, and another 4 is 16. The defense is a 2 doubled for mountains to 4. So they do have a 4-to-1 attack, which is actually pretty good for the Spanish Civil War, given the rough parity in the armed forces here, and the lack of any real quality units on either side. So you hate to pass up a 4-to-1 on this impulse with this attack. It would be great had the militia unit been able to make it here. It would have given them 20-4, which would have been a 5-to-1 and a cheap, quick to build militia unit to soak up any potential loss. So now the Republicans really have to think, do they want to try to bring the militia unit over, moving in this direction, or even though they're not going to make it in time, they certainly don't want to put them somewhere where they're going to be vulnerable to any nationalist counterattacks. Do they want to wait an impulse? I don't think they can afford to wait an impulse, because if the nationalists get the chance, they are going to get that cavalry unit out of the danger it is currently in. I think what we will do is at least get the militia moving in that direction for now. Next impulse, this gives them some flexibility in being able to move into either of those two mountain hexes if necessary, or to move towards the northeast, assuming a successful attack here. So with the land movement out of the way, there's no air transport, no debarking, invasions, or paradrops, and that's going to bring us around to the land combat phase. The Republicans are going to make one attack here using the 2 units and these 2 units for a total of 16-4, as we said. That's going to be a 4-1. Now the decision is on the nationalists. Now the nationalists have to make the decision as to which CRT they want to use, blitzkrieg or assault table. The 4-1 column on either table doesn't look terribly appealing. There's only a 10% chance the unit survives on the assault table. Whereas on the blitzkrieg table, there is a, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 40% chance that it's able to survive, although of those chances, 2 of those would be blitz results. So the cavalry would come off and then go on the production circle to arrive as a reinforcement next turn. However, on the blitzkrieg table, the Republicans are going to have a better chance of staying face up, and they're only going to have a 30% chance of incurring any losses. Whereas on the assault table, the chance of inflicting a loss on the Republicans rises to 40%, and if the Republicans roll a 2, like they did last time, they would actually lose 2 units to the single cavalry unit. So do the nationalists feel like they want to try to let that cavalry corps escape, or do they just want to try and make this as bloody as possible? Another element to this decision is the chances of the Republican attackers remaining face up. And on the assault table, there's only a 20% chance that they all remain face up, with another 20% chance that half of them remain face up. Whereas if we go to the blitz table, that becomes a 40% chance of remaining face up for all of the units, with an additional 20% chance that half of them remain face up. So while the blitzkrieg table will allow the cavalry a better chance to live to fight another day, it also does really increase the chances of the Republicans being able to follow up the attack with most of their, or perhaps all of their units face up. Tough call here, but I think we are going to have the Republicans roll on the blitzkrieg table. The cavalry corps costs 3 build points, and it takes 3 turns to arrive. That's probably the bigger factor in this decision. If the nationalists get lucky, even if they suffer a blitz result, what that's going to mean is the cavalry will leave the map as if they were destroyed, but they're going to come right back next turn, and more importantly, the nationalists won't have to pay to rebuild them. So with that, we are going to roll the die here on the 4-1 blitz CRT with no modifier to the die roll. The Republicans are looking to get well, they would like an 8 or better, because that'll kill the unit and leave everybody face up. Well, they got almost the opposite of an 8. They got a 1. Not what they were looking for. So far, the Republicans have managed to roll a 2 and a 1 in both of their attacks. The results on the blitzkrieg table is actually the exact same as it would have been on the assault table. The attackers lose 1, defenders lose no units. So coming back here now, the Republicans are going to have to decide which one of their units they're going to destroy, and then turn all of the others face down. Now, they've got a garrison here. The cavalry, again, this cavalry is expensive and takes a while to come back. They don't want to kill their best units, certainly. They have an infantry here, and they have a garrison in Valencia. The garrison only costs 2 and takes 2 turns, whereas the infantry is a 3. So I think they're going to take the economic choice here, try and save themselves a build point, and kill the garrison. And then that is also, unfortunately, going to turn the other 3 units all face down, which is going to really kind of put a crimp on any plans that the Republicans had for this turn. So things are going about as well as the Nationalists could have hoped, I think, at this point. Moving on from the land combat step, we have air rebases and reorganization, neither of which are going to apply here in Spain. And with that, we're going to move into the fascist first impulse. Well, the Italians are doing a combined, and they are going to use their one naval move to send their transport here into the Eastern Med on the outbound leg to East Africa to bring back what will be most likely the artillery unit this turn. And with that, we don't have any air strategic bombardment, anything along those lines, no ground strikes to do. So that's going to bring us right back here to Spain, and the Spanish nationalists have some stuff to do. Now, they are counting their blessings right now for just how inept the Republican attacks have been so far. They have no rail movement. When we come to land movement, now, it's an interesting situation here. They would normally have been having this cavalry unit try to escape from their current situation, but with all of the adjacent Republicans turned face down, they're really under no threat of attack at this point. In fact, the Nationalists are considering launching a bit of a counterattack. The infantry corps here for the Republicans is face down. If we bring both units located here in Zaragoza, there's 5 combat factors. We could move them here. We've got another 8 here. That's 13, and 2 more is 15. So 15 to 4, which is actually going to be doubled to 8 for the mountains. That leaves us one combat strength point shy of getting a 2-to-1. That'll put us on the 3-to-2, but it is a +1, which really is kind of the equivalent of rolling on the 2-to-1 straight up, although you'd much rather have a 2-to-1 +1 instead of a 3-to-2 +1. So the question now is, do we want to take that risk? We've seen how similar attacks have worked out for the Republicans, and quite honestly, as I'm looking at the 3-to-2 column on the assault table, even with a +1, on a 1 or a 2, the Nationalists could lose 2 units, which would be pretty devastating for them, even if one of them is the Blue Division here. They simply just don't have enough stuff on map yet. They've got plenty of garrisons sitting back here, but as far as the field army, if you will, the maneuver units, they really only have 4 corps and a division. And they're not very powerful units at that. Half of them only have a 2 combat strength, so it's very tough to take these guys on in the mountains. Now the militia here are not in the mountains, at least for the moment, but I don't think they're vulnerable, because we just can't get the only guys that can reach them to make the attack would be the units here in Zaragoza, and we'd be looking at a 1-to-1. So as much as the Nationalists would like to take advantage of this, what do we have here? It's the same thing here in actually Valencia. Valencia would only have a 6 defense, but that would rule out the units in Zaragoza taking part in the attack. We could really only bring 6, 8, 10. 10 to 6 is still not even a 2-to-1. That might be worth the gamble, considering that it would give us a city and it would force the Republican Navy to rebase. But I don't think it's worth it at a 3-to-2. So we will look at moving. We have up to 3 land moves, since the Italians don't necessarily need to move anything this impulse. I think what we'll end up doing is we'll slide the militia unit there, where they'll have to stop for the zone of control. We'll pull the cavalry corps back in here with the guards, and let's bring the this will bring the division up here just to strengthen that hex. Again, the Nationalists don't have anything to worry about with respect to the Republicans here face down. So actually, rather than do that, maybe we do slide the guard corps here, which will give us a little more some little better possibilities maybe in future impulses, depending upon how long the turn goes. I don't think they can quite sweep around to Madrid. They may end up just chasing the militia back in. I don't know, we'll see. There are going to be no attacks, sadly, on the part of the nationalists here, which brings us to the end of a less than thrilling fascist impulse, and we're on to the communists. Now, the marker has been going up 2 boxes after each of these impulses. We're currently in impulse 5 for the communist impulse. They're not doing anything. They're not passing because they don't want to subtract 2 to the end of turn die roll. They're just simply not doing anything. And that's going to shift us up to, there's no chance to end the turn in the 5 box, so another 2 will bring us up to the 7 box and back around to the Democrats' second impulse. So let's roll weather and then see what, if anything, the Democrats are going to do from here on out. Well, nobody's going to be doing much of anything. The weather roll was a 9, which resulted in storm in the Arctic, rain in both North Temperate and the Med, as well as storm in North Monsoon. So all of Spain here now is rain. That's going to double movement costs. It's going to give us a 1 odds level shift down. It's pretty much going to shut down the war, at least for this impulse. We also get a +1 to the weather roll for next impulse, and with September, October on the chart, you roll high, that's where the bad weather is. So we may have some early winter weather moving in. With that in mind, I think the only thing we're going to do is, question here, we're going to say we'd like to get this militia unit. If we get the militia unit into the mountains here, that would effectively double their defense to an 8. We already know that the nationalists are a little hesitant to attack an 8 strength hex, and it would leave room in Madrid for reinforcements that we know are coming next turn. Otherwise, they're going to have to set up in cities a little further back here. In fact, the only other cities that the Republicans control are Valencia, Seville, Malaga, and I guess Tangier here in Spanish Morocco. I've almost forgotten about this for the whole time, but we don't want to set up anybody in Tangier because they're going to be stuck there, since the only transports, naval transports that the Spanish have belong to the nationalists, or under the control of the nationalists. So we definitely don't want to leave this guy out here where he's going to be fairly vulnerable. If I move him into the mountains, that's going to invert him, just like the attackers from last impulse. I guess the one thing we know is that the rain is going to slow down the very slow nationalists as it is. So best they could do would get this stack to slide over. That would be an 8 to 4. That would be a 2 to 1, but then it's going to be 1 odds column down to a 3 to 2. You know what? I'm not going to take the chances on that. We'll just pull the militia back into Madrid here and hope for maybe better weather next impulse that'll allow them to maybe deploy northeast of Madrid here in the mountains. So we'll see. Other than that, all the other Republican forces are pretty much face down, and I don't think, no, we still don't have a chance of ending the turn, even though it is going to go up another 2. That's going to bring us to impulse box number 9. It would be a 0 to end the turn at the end of the upcoming fascist. So we know that the communists are going to get at least 1 more impulse, and then we'll see what the weather looks like elsewhere. So for now, on to the fascist second impulse. Well, there's not going to be much to see here either. The nationalists, they're not necessarily real happy about the weather either, but they will take the opportunity to move these 2 units out of Zaragoza as far as they can while remaining face up. And that's pretty much the extent of the fascist second impulse. Again, they would need to roll a 0, which is not possible on the die, so it'll advance 2 boxes to the 11 box, and it's now the communist impulse. They are not going to do anything. Again, they're not passing, they're just sitting there passively. But there is a chance that the turn may end here if the communists roll a 1. So we'll see what happens here. Pretty close. The roll was a 2. So the turn does continue into a third set of impulses, and we are back around to the third Democrat impulse. And I guess we'll just keep it here real quick and roll for the weather. It is, it's bad and getting worse. I don't know if you can see that. That's a 10, and we had +1 from last impulse, which gives us an 11. And this is not pretty here. This is the 11 for September, October. It's going to be snow in the Arctic, storm in North Temperate, rain in the Med, storm in North Monsoon, rain in South Monsoon, rain in South Temperate. It's going to go up 3 boxes after each impulse, and there's going to be a +2 to the die roll for the next weather roll. And you can see if the turn ends here, we're looking at almost no chance of having some good weather in November, December. So it may be a fast couple of turns on the maps here, given the poor weather. With that, the Republicans are, well, there's a chance the turn will end here, but only if they roll a 2 or less, and then it's going to go up 3. I don't know that they're necessarily planning on getting another impulse, although it could potentially happen. If that's the case, you know, if they, again, we were talking about moving the militia unit out of Madrid here. So if we come back to the map for a moment, if we move that militia unit up here, he's going to be face down, giving the nationalists a +1. They would potentially have, again, the same thing, 8, 12, 13 to 8. That's only a 3 to 2. With the rain, that's going to drop it to a 1 to 1, +1. Yeah, you know what? I think it's worth the gamble here, and we're going to bring the militia unit out. That's really the only thing that the Republicans have to do. So the other Democrats have nothing to do, and we said it's a 2 or less to end the turn. So let's see what happens when we make that end of turn roll. It is a 10. So the turn continues. It's going to go up 3 boxes now to the 1, 2, 3 to the 16 box, and it is the fascist impulse. And again, they're looking at some the same bad weather. It is true. It is only rain here in the Med as opposed to storm up here. Now the question is, you know, do the nationalists really, do they press on westward here and kind of open a little gap that the Republicans might be able to exploit, assuming the turn were to end here, and again the Democrats beat the fascists for initiative in November, December. We're not expecting good weather in the next impulse, whether it's in September, October, or November, December, but you never know. If we do get another impulse here, there's enough good weather in September, October that if we roll low, we'll have some fine weather here, certainly in the Med. I just don't know that there's really anything to be gained, certainly by moving this stack out to the west here, unless we were going to make an attack, and the nationalists just are absolutely not going to make a 1-to-1 +1 attack, especially on a cheap and quickly replaced unit like the militia. They've got a lot more to lose. They would be turned face down, so they wouldn't even be able to follow up any success here. Let's say they did roll well enough to kill the militia without loss. They're almost certainly going to be face down, preventing them from pushing on and making an attack here against Madrid, which would be the ultimate goal. So I think I think what we can do is maybe let's go ahead and we can bring. Do we want to bring these guys down into the forest here? That's the question. Think of either shifting this stack westward or bringing them in here. What we don't want to do is get all of our units sucked in here and then somehow have the Republicans maybe next turn do an end run around us and head up towards Bilbao, take both the city, the factory, and the resource up there. Yeah, you know what? Let's. It would be perhaps a little vulnerable in there. Let's go ahead and we'll just push them out to the west here, start to form at least some kind of a line to the west. And we'll just wait for better weather, and more importantly, we'll wait for more reinforcements. Now, the end of turn roll for the fascists is a 3. And we will see if they are able to end the turn. I don't know that they would necessarily want to end the turn, but a 5 keeps the turn alive for the communists, who we know are not going to be doing anything. So that's 1, 2, 3. That's up to the 19 box now, and it is a 4 or less for the communists to end the turn. So let's see what the communists do. They managed to roll a 6, and this is the turn that will not end despite the horrific weather. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and roll this weather real quick for the next impulse. We've got a +2 this time, and it stays pretty bad with a 9. +2 becomes an 11. That's the exact same weather as last time. A +2 to the die roll goes up 3 after each impulse. I'll have to take a look at the map here, but I don't think we're going to see much of anything else happen on map at this point. Be back in a second. Now, there's really nothing for the Republicans to do here, so we're just going to go right back to the end of turn die roll. However, now it is a 6 or less. And a 2 mercifully brings the turn to an end. What that is going to do, unfortunately for the Democrats, is it is going to shift them 1 box to the left, because they ended up getting an extra impulse, even though that impulse saw them do absolutely nothing. So a little bit of insult to injury there. On the maps, with this being the end of the turn, we have a return to base, and the only return to base we have is the Italian transport ending up here back in Eritrea. And then its final reorganization, we do have some reorganizing to do for the Republicans. All of the units are in supply and are therefore able to reorganize. We'll flip these guys back over, and there are no partisans or U.S. entry to handle. So that's going to bring us right along into production. So I'll go ahead and calculate what everybody's producing this turn, figure out what they're going to build, and we'll probably maybe wrap this episode up again here in September, October with a review of this turn's builds. Production for each of the major powers was unchanged from last turn. For the fascists, the Germans produced 7, the Japanese 6, and the Italians 3 build points. The Soviets got their standard 3 build points as they have each turn so far this game. And then for the Democrats, the Commonwealth produced 5, France and the United States each produced 3, and China produced 1. Now, what did they do with that income? Excuse me. We'll start off, as usual, with the fascists. The Germans built a convoy point, and they pulled the Gneisenau out of the construction pool for just a single build point. It's a rather cheap battleship, probably the cheapest second cycle you're going to see on any battleship in the game. So that total cost was 2 for them. The Italians also dipped into the construction pool. They have begun the second cycle of their very first aircraft carrier, the Aquila. That cost them 2 build points. Japan was not going to be left out of the naval race. They began the first cycle of a light carrier here, and they built a convoy point. They also built an infantry corps, and here you should be back in the construction pool there. So infantry starting to come out onto the circle for a major power. That usually indicates kind of just one thing. So we'll see what happens here in the near future. The communists are sitting currently, after getting their 3 build points this turn, they are back up to 0 on the money track, and therefore they are going to hold off on producing anything this turn. For the Democrats, China is actually building something. They are also building an infantry corps, and as you can see, it looks like that's going to be a communist unit when it arrives. But due to the imposed truce over there, Chang's not going to have to worry about facing that unit for a number of years. The United States decided to pull the WASP out of the construction pool and begin the second cycle on that. That cost them 2 build points. France also went to the construction pool and decided to start the second cycle on Strasbourg for 2, and then they also began construction of a fighter for another 2. So that's 4 build points spent by France. Finally, the Commonwealth. Commonwealth had a bit of a subdued turn here. They've been burning through a lot of money in political options the last couple of turns, so they are only going to begin training a pilot, and they are beginning construction of a light cruiser. That's a total cost of 3 to China. In Spain, for the Spanish Civil War, the Republicans still have 9 build points and the Nationalists have 6. With their 6, the Nationalists have decided to build a headquarters unit, and the Republicans, they've got 9 build points, but the problem is they don't have anything in their force pool except for the lone garrison unit, which was destroyed in the combat this turn. So they will build the garrison and end up wasting 7 of their production. I think both sides in the Spanish Civil War are really eager for 1938 to get here. It's a minor power. Spain, granted, does have one of the larger militaries of all of the minor countries in the game. So it's still not that big, and the annual additions aren't much, but you can see right now that even 1 or 2 units being added to the force pool come 1938 will be a pretty sizable increase to the forces they can field on the map, assuming the war goes that long. And at this pace, with the Republican incompetence in their attacks, they can only hope that the Nationalists are just as inept as they are. Otherwise, it could end up being a rather short civil war. But that all is in the future. We're going to wrap up this episode today with just the September-October turn. We'll pick up next time with November-December. The weather doesn't look to be all that great, considering we've got a +2 to the die roll, and generally speaking, November-December weather along with January-February is pretty bad. However, we did see a little bit of action starting to happen here, both on the political side with a number of political options being played, and on map as the Spanish Civil War starts to get going. I anticipate next time we'll probably be able to get through a short November-December and probably a short January-February turn as well. Maybe even get into March-April, just depending upon how short each of those first 2 turns are. But that's going to do it for today. Appreciate you all watching. Take care.